Hello, everyone, and welcome to this week's webinar. I am going to get started here and then turn things over to our guest. So today our webinar is entitled Rhinos, Radioisotopes, and Radiation Protection, and we have with us the project lead from the Rhisotope Project, James Larkin. Before starting, we would like to acknowledge that the spaces in which we at the Institute work in Toronto are located on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, and the Haudenosaunee and the Wendat peoples. Fergal Nolan National Laboratories in Saskatoon is located on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis people. We thank them for their care of the land and pay respect to them and their ancestors. We ask that during the presentation portion that the audio and video be from the presenter only. To turn on closed captions, go to More, Language and Speech, turn on live captions. Please use the chat feature for any discussions and post questions arriving from the content in the Q&A. This will help us find your questions for the allotted Q&A portion while allowing people to have a conversation in the chat. I'll be sending a confirmation of attendance email after the webinar video is uploaded online and will include a link to it with that communication. I will also include the topics covered and the length of the time spent in the webinar, as some people have requested this to send to their professional association. The webinar will begin with a presentation on the Rhisotope Project given by James, followed by a question and answer session. James Larkin is the project leader of the Rhisotope Project. This initiative introduces trace, non-harmful amounts of radioisotopes into rhino horns to make them detectable by routine radiation monitors at borders and ports to deter trafficking. He's also an adjunct professor and the director of Radiation and Health Physics, director of the Radiation Health Physics Unit, RHPU, at the University of Witwatersrand, Wits, the lead institution for the Rhisotope Project. In addition to this work, James is also a Fellow of the Royal Society of Medicine UK, FRSM, member of the Institute for Nuclear Materials Management, US, INMM, a founding member of the South African Radiation Protection Association, SARPA, and a visiting researcher, King's College London. Larkin has held leadership positions in the International Nuclear Education and Security Networks, including past chairmanship of the IAEA's International Nuclear Security Education Network, INSEN. Due to the special nature of this engagement, our regular format will vary. The presentation will be at least 40 minutes in length, followed by up to 20 minutes of Q&A with those in attendance. As this webinar is part of our ongoing Radiation Safety and Wellness webinar series, the final 20 minutes will be a wellness break with beginner Tai Chi with Charmaine Wong of Jiang Tai Chi in Qigong and Richmond Hill. Charmaine realizes that with our special guest coming in that it might be delayed, and we realize that some people only have the hour, but we'll work around that. Please note that the webinar is for information purposes only. And with that, I'm going to turn things over to James. And thank you so much for being here with us today, James. And I have to get him on screen. So let's see. There you go. There we go. So welcome, James.
Thank you very much indeed. Thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us at this presentation. I see people coming from places like Tbilisi, so it must be very late at night there. So thank you very much for taking your time to join us here. And thank you for your interest in this project. I mean, it's very gratifying. So I have to give you a bit of a warning. There is on slide number 7 some very graphic images of rhino that have been poached. So I will warn you again, but if that's something that will upset you, please turn away at that particular point. But that all being said, let's get underway. And hopefully now that you can see the presentation, always has started with the obligatory brag page, but Lynn has already talked about that, so I can swiftly move past that. But basically to say, I've done a lot of nuclear security education work and a lot of radiation protection work over the years, and so we'll go on and I can explain more as we get to it. So how does a radiation scientist end up being in rhino conservation? Well, let me give you a very potted background to where I came from. I was born in Kenya, so Makes me, as they say, once you've tasted the waters of Africa, you never really leave. I moved back to South Africa in 95. And as the story goes, I moved out here 30 years ago and I forgot to go back to the UK. But it helped that the rest of the family eventually moved out here. So South Africa has been my home for the last 30 years. When I first came out, though, I was actually coming out to work on the gold mines, not in conservation at all. And it was only in 99 that I actually joined Wits University to run a couple of courses there. From that, I was asked in 2010, just prior to 2010, to help train people for the 2010 FIFA World Cup that was held in South Africa. And that kind of laid the foundations for my nuclear security background. And I've been doing that for many years now, 15 odd years, but it doesn't seem quite like that long. And it was only after I met some people who wanted to use radioactivity to poison horn that I started to think, well, hang on a minute. That's not a good idea, because if I'm involved in that, I'm going to end up going to jail for trying to poison people. But I could possibly think this thing through, and it was one of those 3 o'clock in the morning type thoughts, being a notorious insomniac, that I came to another idea, which I'll explain to you about, and then we'll talk about the whole radiation protection aspects of it. But it's that old story, when you've seen pictures of poaching that's gone on and the effects of these animals, that, it's always that old story, somebody should do something about the poaching. And a thought came to me, maybe I could do something about it. So in essence, if you like, I have this intersection of radiation protection, nuclear security, and the love of the African wildlife that put me in a fairly unique position to be able to do something about this poaching, because my background quite clearly isn't conservation, but it's more sort of radiation protection. So that's where I come from and what brought me to me. And let's spend a bit of time just talking about the poaching crisis in South Africa, in fact, in Africa, to be honest with you. South Africa, we are the home for 80% of the global population of black and white rhinoceros, which means we should be the ones that are making the strenuous efforts to look after these beautiful animals. Yes, they might look grey and ugly to you, but I promise you, once you get up close and personal to these things, you begin to realise these animals have a personality and they are very unique and very special in their own particular way. We can look at, I'll show you the figures just now, that at first glance, the poaching numbers are going down, but that's really not the whole story, because nowadays we are finding that one of the solution of last hope for looking after rhinos is to dehorn them. But we are now seeing that poachers are now killing these dehorned animals as well. And the latest figures, these are the official figures. The Kruger National Park, which some of you might have known about, it's a piece of land about the size of Israel on the northeast borders of South Africa, and it extends for a long way down on the border between South Africa, Eswatini, what was Swaziland, and there we see a lot of animals being poached. 88 animals killed in 2024. In December alone, 21 animals were killed in the Kruger National Park. And in the latest figures you could get hold, another 17 animals have been killed. And bearing in mind, these are the numbers of poaching that's going on. And in the Kruger Park alone, we've seen the numbers in the park falling by 75%. So that's the poaching figures you can see in South Africa. We can see the dip in 2019, 2020, which was basically because of COVID. People couldn't move around the country. But the rate at which the poaching is still going on has not changed. So just to put it in other perspectives, these are the figures from 2020. But when we look at the numbers of both white rhino and black rhino in the Kruger National Parks, you see the population decline. White rhino are currently registered or listed as threatened. Black rhino are listed as critically endangered. And we are seeing that the rates of poaching haven't changed, both in South Africa and in other parts of the world. And we're actually starting to see rates post-COVID starting to nudge back up again. So the situation has not been brought under control despite the very best efforts of people who are dedicated to saving these animals' lives. So we've got to find something new, some better way rather than just the guns, the guards, the gates. And now if you are squeamish, I would suggest you look away now, but you need to understand what is the reality of poaching. Some animals do survive, and what is particularly hideous is what's called the wild type of horn, is the most considered by those who are selling it in the Far East to be the more potent than that horn that is removed in some sort of dehorning program. And it's on the basis of more potent is more valuable. So to give you some ideas when I talk about value, the horn, depending on reports, but it can be worth up to something like $60,000 per kilogram. And a mature rhino horn can easily weigh 2.5 kilograms. So you can begin to understand what we are dealing with. This is it's a false commodity in many ways. Its value can be compared to that of cocaine and things like that. But just to really, and if you are squeamish, look away now. This is the reality of what we are dealing with. Picture on the left was a famous photograph. The picture on the center and the right, that animal lived for 150 days thereafter after it was poached. You see and realize she had 40 separate operations to try and cure and deal with the removal of that bone, because rhinos have very detailed sinuses within the skull, which rhinos have poor eyesight and they rely on the sense of smell. So by doing that, by hacking that animal like that, you have basically turned that animal, well, you've crippled the poor animal. Some have managed to survive, but not many. So that's the reality of what we're dealing with, and that's what drew me into this whole poaching thing and thinking, is there some way that we can actually protect these animals? So what is the idea? It's we use small measured quantities of specific radioisotope inserted into the horns of rhinos. Sounds a very simple idea, but as you see, we'll talk about the RP and the impact of this. But at a population level, what will be the effect? It devalues the horns in the eyes of end users, because we all know people generally are unwilling to handle something that they might perceive to be radioactive, and we also know that people generally radically overestimate the harm of any particular radiation dose. And what you need to understand is that within rhino poaching, it's not done on an ad hoc basis, but it's done by international criminal gangs. So if they, the value of the rhino horn is falling because people no longer want it, they won't send out the poaching teams to go out, who will go out for a week to up to 3 weeks in places like the Kruger National Park, where they'll go out as a team of 3 and they will poach animals then. So if there's less demand, then there's less poaching at the population level. As an added advantage, though, it makes it significantly easier to detect poached horn as it's moved across international borders. Research shown by a number of different organizations shows that much of the rhino horn coming out of southern Africa goes in suitcases, and so by having these detectors at airports, at harbors, at border crossings, we significantly increase the probability of detecting rhino horn as it's moved out, and so it increases the penalties. For example, here in South Africa, if you're caught in possession of material out of regulatory control, that is automatically a crime against the state. So that means there's a much higher emphasis placed on that criminal act. And with something like 11,000 installed radiation monitors around the world, coupled with detectors carried on the belt, we've significantly increased the probabilities of harm being detected. And I'll talk to you about some of the testing that we've done against this particular claim later on. And if you like, the advantages for a single animal, they keep their horns. Research work shows, certainly in black rhino, there is a deleterious effect on the behavior of an animal. If you remove its horn, they don't tend to move so far within their sort of zone, so there's less chance of animals interacting, less chance of animals mating. Doesn't harm the rhinos. We'll talk more about this in a minute, about the whole RP aspects of the dose to the heads of the rhinos. And also, it's quicker, easier, and less stressful than dehorning. And I'll talk again a bit about what dehorning really means going forward. And also, because of the isotope that we've chosen, we only need to renew the isotopes once every 5 years, unlike dehorning, which can be done every 18 months to 2 years, and in certain circumstances it's done every year, depending on the risk to the animal. I know in the Kruger Park they're talking about having to do it every year now. So that's the advantages. So sort of coming on more to the sort of whole radiation protection aspects of it, one of the important things to consider is going through the processes of justification, optimization, and dose limiting. And so the first question to ask then, is there a net benefit to the rhinos by doing this work? And this has been a very important discussion and process that we've had to go through in, proving to the owners of rhinos and proving to the regulators that what I'm proposing and what we're doing is in fact justified. And obviously those people who have a background in radiation protection understand we don't need to just think about the effect of the dose to the animal, but we have to think about the other risks and the other benefits and costs associated with carrying out this whole activity. So we'll go through that now just to sort of talk a bit about it. So there are for issues when you consider a single animal, then we need to think, what are the detriments to the animal? Well, first of all, then obviously you're going to give this animal a radiological exposure. And we have to work out whether there's any stochastic or deterministic effects. In the work that we've done, we know there are no deterministic effects. And we believe the stochastic effects have been kept to a very minimum. And also, obviously, when you're working with these animals, if you're going to sedate them, there's always a certain probability of harm when you carry out any sort of medical procedure. You see it in hospitals. That's why if you've been into hospital and you've had an anesthetic, you sign a consent form, you are recognizing that there is a potential for harm by having those drugs injected to you. And this is exactly the same thing with working with rhinos. There is a measurable risk associated with sedating and immobilizing them. We found with the Rhisotope Project, we've managed to radically reduce that risk because we've reduced the quantity of drugs needed in immobilizing the animals as compared to dehorning. We need to think about the cost of treatment because working with animals like this is not cheap. You have to have capture teams. You have to have a helicopter flying, and that's always an expensive habit. You've got to have a professional vet there. You've got the drugs associated. So these are things that we obviously need to consider in all of our thinking going forward about the whole justification of this process. But there are some benefits. If we get this right, then these animals live to reproduce. Rhinos have a long gestation period. Females have a gestation period of 16 months, and then a calf will be at foot with her for probably 2 to 3 years. So in that time, she's unlikely to breed again, and they live to 35, 40 years if we're lucky. So, a female can only reproduce a limited number of times, and to be able to increase the international population, then obviously we need these animals to survive. We're not dehorning them because so then we don't have that reduction in behavior and or modification in behavior of the animals. So that's obviously a benefit to these things. And also by doing this insertion once every 5 years rather than dehorning once every 18 months, 2 years, then we're reducing that number of immobilizations or sedations that we need to do for the animal. So then there are other issues that we will want to consider on a much broader scale. There are those people who still believe that there is value in the rhino horn and they should be able to trade in this horn. I'll keep my thoughts to myself about that, but that is something that needs to be considered in the overall justification. We need to think about the cost of maintaining security, because at the moment, I'll show you some figures, the actual cost associated with keeping these animals secure is quite horrendous. And, many of the security efforts at the moment are almost paramilitary in style, in that you need to have armed rangers patrolling 24/7, 365 days of the year to protect these animals because of the value of what they carry on their snouts. There has been some evidence that suggests that the whole financing and the monies involved with wildlife trafficking of rhino horn and things like that has been used in terrorism funding, particularly in places like the Horn of Africa and other parts of Africa as well. If we can reduce poaching in a particular area, then we are going to be able to reduce the overall level of crime associated in that area, because it's quite clear, we've seen many times when we see poaching syndicates moving into a particular area in southern Africa, we get a lot of other crime, including arms, drugs and trafficking issues coming along as well. So if we can prevent that, so much the better for the local population. By having these animals at parks, we see that there is social upliftment, decent jobs for people on an ongoing basis. We also see these rhinos as mega herbivores. They have a very profound effect on the ecosystem in which they move. The more grazing and the browsing that goes on, this then allows there to be a diversity of grasses, shrubs, plants, which then increases the diversity of insects, which has this whole process of diversity of insects, then much more diverse bird populations and rodents. And so we see this much greater diversity in a particular ecosystem in which rhinos live. Also, guardianship. We want to look after these animals because we want to be able for our next generations, for you to be able to sort of show your children and your grandchildren these animals grazing in the wild rather than behind some sort of bars in a zoo somewhere. So also on a much broader thing, this is another reason in which to keep the RPM systems operating, because we are now usually have an additional reason to operate these systems, which is the protection of wildlife. At the moment, rhino, but we'll come on to other animals later on that we'll be looking at to do this. So just to tell you about dehorning, these are the pictures of it. Generally, it's done with a chainsaw, done every 18 months. You have to sedate the animal for best part of half an hour, if not 3/4 of an hour, because you take the horn and then you have to then tidy up what you've trimmed off. It's noisy. It requires a lot of drugs to keep the animals completely sedated. I don't like it, and I believe if we get these things right with the Rhisotope Project, we'll see the end of this system. Vets do it, but they're not keen on doing it. So just to show you what the security options are at the moment, we have armed anti-poaching patrols, we have access control to game parks and things like that. We are bringing modern technology of drones, cameras, radar. All of these things have been tried, but we're still only holding things at bay, and we're finding, the costs. This is, a research work done 5 years ago, but you can see places are spending, their increase in expenditure over the previous decade has been more than 200% in some areas. So we have to find other alternatives, and we believe the Rhisotope Project is that alternative. So coming on to the kind of more of the science side of things, how much radioisotope do we put in the horn? Where do we put it in the horn? Is it safe for the animal? These were all questions that obviously need to be answered in the course of doing our due diligence. And so we've basically had to do a number of different exercises, identify the appropriate radioisotopes. We've needed to work out what the activity concentration is. Will those activity concentrations set off the portal monitors, and at what probability? Will there be any deterministic effects on the animals? How do we put those isotopes into the horn? Where do we put them in the horn? And obviously then the regulator has a very profound impact on all of this. He will want to know what are the exposures to people. So that's, for example, the veterinary surgeons who are doing the work, people like myself are doing the work, veterinary nurses who might have to work on the rhino. We've even had to contemplate what the dose effects to the poachers are, to the people who work the rhino horns, and also then do a final, calculation to what might be the radiological effects to the end users. And obviously then we need to get things like the regulatory approval and ethics approval from the university, because this is all based at Wits University. So they have been very instrumental in keeping a safe eye on what I've been doing. So when we were choosing the radioisotope, we needed to say, if we put it into the horn, where will it stay in the horn? So we did some initial work using stable isotopes of carbon and nitrogen. What's the half-life of the isotope? Because, as I said, an animal lives up to maybe 40 years. Do we need to do a single treatment? And do we choose a radioisotope like that? Or do we do a series of treatments and repeat it so the isotope decays away? So someone, if they really do want to sell the horn after a period of time, they might then be able to dispose of that horn. We came to the conclusion that, as our animals are dehorned on around about 18 months, that a sort of recharge option would be a good way to look at this thing. And we balance the risk associated with mobilization and sedation. And so that's where we come down to say, well, that we'll do it once every 5 years. Important thing from the nuclear security aspect of things is, if a package or a truck moves through through a portal monitor, we don't want that person or that isotope to be claimed to be a medical isotope in transport or something in transit. So again, we chose a particular radioisotope which is not generally considered as a medical radioisotope, and so can be recognized as material out of regulatory control. And as a detector is set off, the appropriate actions can then be taken with that particular incident. And of importance is the cost and availability of those radioisotopes. We could have worked with Nexa, because we work very closely with Nuclear Energy Corporation of South Africa, to decide what is the appropriate radioisotope. Can we make it? What's going to be the extraction processes? Are there going to be specialist processes? What are those going to be the associated costs? And eventually we've settled on a particular isotope. Sorry, it's easy to make, easy to handle, readily available, and basically ticks all of the boxes for what we needed to do. So then we identified the isotope. Then we needed to say, how much of it do we need, because we want to understand what the doses are. And obviously then we bring in the concept of ALARA with all of this work. So we wanted to be able to obviously determine, prevent our deterministic effects, reduce the stochastic effects, and basically come to a decision what is an appropriate activity concentration. So and would it then be detected by an average radiation portal monitor? So this is where I spent a good deal of time basically creating, well, taking a CT scan, which we were lucky enough to get from the Whitmer labs at Ohio State University, because you're doing a CT scan of a rhino isn't the easiest thing in the world. So we were very fortunate that this work had already been done, and they were happy for me to get hold of these scans. And then this allowed me to create what is a segmented image of the head of a rhino, which is based on, if you're a radiologist, you understand the term of Hounsfield units, which is basically what the density is in particular areas. And so you can assign a range of densities and say that's bone, or that's skin tissue, or that's a rhino, that's horn. And that allowed me then to create this segmented model, which it took quite a bit of doing, but finally managed to achieve it. And then obviously in terms of RP, what areas of the head of the rhino, because we didn't really need to consider the rest of the animal using the inverse square law. We wanted to say, well, what are the potentially radiosensitive parts of the animal? And we decided upon where the horn grows based on the understanding of the growth rates of the horn of a rhino. We wanted to look at the eyes. We wanted to look at the brain. And believe it or not, we needed to look at the skin, because at first glance, you look at the skin of a rhino and think this is a very tough hide. But when you actually just gently run your hand over it, you realize it's actually covered in tiny hairs. So we needed to be, which obviously then have a significant regrowth rate. So we then realized that we'd need to think about doing the dose assessment to the skin of the animal as well. So then to identify where in the horn we needed to be able to do some work, and I was lucky enough to work with a team of vets who were doing a project on dehorning, and we took a series of radiographs to look at what is, the structure of the horn on the head of the rhino. And there you can see in the right-hand picture that dome. That's actually the skull of the rhino, and just on top of that is the growth plate of the horn, and from which that horn then grows out. And obviously there's some pictures then. You might notice when we sedate a rhino, we put a mask over its head to cover its eyes, and then we put earplugs into the ears of the animal. This just basically reduces the external stimuli and keeps the animals less stressed. And you'll see they're actually taking some blood samples from the rhino as well, because obviously there was other veterinary work going on at the same time. But this then was the final model that it came up with. And then we decided, I kind of working from those x-rays and from the other work, we said, well, let's have a look at where we put the isotopes into the horn. And then we modeled various different positions of it. And so this is what we basically came up with in the end. Is we found that the appropriate dose or activity concentration is around about 400 kilobecquerels. So it gives us a dose in the first year of something over sort of around about 25 millisievert, I would say millisieverts per annum for the first year. And obviously, as the isotope decays away, that dose then falls away. And we reckon it's about the same as 3 head CT scans to the head of a human per annum. So these are very tolerable doses. When I talk to my colleagues in medical physics, they say, these are very tolerable doses. And it then also meant that that activity concentration was enough to set off portal monitors. Again, we did the calculations to start off with. And this, if you like, is the comparison of the dose that the animals are getting as compared to derived consideration reference levels from ICRP. So we were very pleased that these doses were coming in significantly lower than the DCRLs that have been published. We then said, okay, well, we obviously this is the theoretical work that's been done. We now need to put my neck on the block and actually do some theoretical work, or some practical work rather, to be able to complete our radiological hazard assessments and to be able to develop the radiation protection program. So there were two groups. We really need to prove that this is a safe, secure and justified project. First of all is the university's Animal Ethics Committee. I had to, because of the way we worked on this project, I approached them first time around and got their approval to do the stable isotope work, and then approached them for a second time when we were actually going to go and do the pilot project, which I'll tell you a little bit more about just now. So they are the first people, and then obviously, as we all realise, then I've got to demonstrate to the regulatory authorities that this is safe. It's a safe process for all concerned. But also, as we move on, we realise that obviously I get approval here in South Africa, but as we go from country to country, I will need then to be able to talk to people like in Botswana, the regulators in Botswana, in Namibia, Eswatini, and also now we're talking, we've just had an initial conversation with organisations in India because they have the one-horn rhino there, which also is under threat from poaching. So this is something that we obviously is an incremental process where it's necessary to demonstrate. And so some of the issues that we've addressed with the regulator obviously is the management and control of sources, because this is very different to a very, normal sort of thing, is that we are putting sources into something that moves around in a not quite controlled manner. So that we needed to demonstrate to them how we are planning to maintain control of those sources. Obviously needed to show what are potential doses to everybody involved, as I mentioned already, from myself as the person putting the sources into the animal to the end user might inadvertently consume some of the isotope as a result of having obtained the horn. We needed to develop processes to demonstrate, standard operating procedures if their source, it's a horn, is taken and the source is lost. There are existing regulations in place for the loss of control of a source, but we then needed to marry those regulations with what we're proposing to, what we're doing with these animals, and also how a horn should be treated if it's detected at a border crossing or something like that. So we've obviously needed to establish standard operating procedures that recognise, what are the frontline officers, what are the forensic issues, because if a horn is taken then and is seized, then obviously there's going to be a whole forensic process associated in it. And basically also, how do we get that horn back to the owner of the animal? Unfortunately, we can't get it back to the rhino, but we can get it back to the owner of the animal that was poached. So those were some of the things that when we're dealing with the regulator, and I am aware of the time, so I'm going to talk quickly now about the pilot project, because we've been through this whole theoretical process of the modelling of the animals, looking at activity concentrations, are they detectable? But it's all very well to say, yeah, in theory this works. We need then to be able to practically demonstrate it. So we've taken a number of steps then to actually demonstrate this. And this is based, if you like, on the pilot project. This was where we took 20 rhinos at the Rhino orphanage in Limpopo, and we set some particular criteria for which animals we wanted to treat. They needed to be adults, so they needed a horn longer than 15 centimeters, because obviously you need a certain distance between the horn of the animal well, sorry, the isotope within that you're putting into the horn and the growth plate, because as I showed you, that's one of the areas of significant cellular division. So that's perhaps one of the areas most likely to be affected by any radiation dose. We also treated black rhinos and white rhinos because we're very fortunate that they have some black rhinos at the orphanage. And then we treated a number of male and female white rhinos as well. And what was great there is that these animals are checked every single day by the team of women there who look after these animals. They are experts in rhino husbandry. They will very quickly recognize if there are any change in behavior of these animals, if there's any abnormal horn growth or anything like that. Also, these animals then are protected 24/7 by armed anti-poaching patrols. So, you know, they are as safe as possible given all the considerations around the security of rhino. And so we came and we actually realized a number of lessons, because obviously this is research and you realize it. This process is a lot quicker than dehorning. We can do this within 10 minutes from the moment the dart goes into the bum of the rhino to the point where I've finished inserting the radioisotopes into the horn. 10 minutes tops nowadays. So that's significantly less. It's per half, if not a third of the time taken for a dehorning. There's significantly less stress because obviously you haven't got chainsaws going, you're not removing the horn, you're not materially affecting the animal in any other way. And also we reduce the quantity of drugs needed by at least half as compared to dehorning. In essence, we just need that animal to almost ideally stand still for the couple of minutes it takes to put the isotopes in. So those were some very encouraging results from the work that we did. And then obviously, these are just some of the kind of brag pictures for you to understand. Because one of the design thoughts when we're doing all of this work is we need to be able to do this at the bottom of a thorn bush in 35 degrees C temperature. So it needs to be quick, simple, and not too stressful for the animal or the people involved, because obviously, there is a certain stress handling this. You can see the team of people needed to move a rhino onto its side if it's actually on its chest. You need some fairly strong and healthy individuals to move some of these animals around. And so we also did some practical work testing horns. We 3D printed horn, use a sort of additive printing at the same density, very similar shielding properties as an actual horn, because obviously moving rhino horn from one country to another requires a huge quantity of paperwork. We tested it at various different systems at JFK Airport. This is on the left-hand side, is going between airside and the postal systems, and we managed to detect horns there at significantly less activity concentrations than we're putting into the horn. And then in the middle there, you can see some of the portal monitors, because we also tested it at Newark Harbour. And just to kind of give you a picture of what's happening, so that was pretty much the final test that we did. That was a full shipping container, and we had 2 horn in there with the appropriate activity concentrations, and we did manage to set off the detectors. So in all of the situations, we were somewhat delighted. Well, I was very delighted, and I'm sure it got a bit dusty, realizing this is the culmination of 5 or 6 years worth of research work. But then just to round out the whole research, we went back and we did tranquilize the animals we had treated, 15 of them, to do some blood testing, because we wanted to have a look at whether there was any measurable radiological harm. So we went back and we took blood tests of 15 of the animals that were treated. We didn't do the rest because of some safety issues, because if you darted some, particularly the black rhino, when you dart them, they run. And the black male, we darted the initial time. We had a drone at standby. And after the dart went in, he ran for the best part of a mile. So we had to be, quite cognizant of what was happening. And there were some rocks that and sort of cliff edges we didn't want animals going off. So we decided we wouldn't dart those particular animals. But this is a process. This sort of biodosimetry is a process which is generally used in humans. I'll show you the results of the test, and this was the final animal that's known as 3/4, and he is a full grown male rhino, and you can see quite how large that animal is when you count the number of people standing behind him. And we did that this year in January, and the results, all of the animals we looked at, they're healthy, the horn growth. So and in fact, one of the female white rhinos we treated last June, she's actually just had a baby calf. So that kind of adds to the grist to the mill. We're very happy with the results of that. And this is if they're the results of the blood tests, in that between the doses that these animals received, we see no difference between the control in the number of micronuclei which we've counted in the white blood cells as compared to the animals which have been received the dose. So this, to my mind, then shows that there is little or no damage done to these animals by this treatment process. And in essence, this is the chronology of the research. Started in 2019. We did isotope work 2021. Started modeling in June. Pilot project last year. Blood sampling. April, we got results back. August, we have now, or July the 31st, we officially launched the project to rhino owners in South Africa. And we are currently in discussion with people in Botswana and Nepal and India as to the implementation of this work elsewhere in the world. So I have to say at this point, these are the people we work with: the IAEA, Texas A&M, the Rhino Orphanage, Colorado State, NEXA, ANSTO, Ghent University, and the US Customs and Border Protection people, without whom this whole thing wouldn't have been possible. And so for the rhinos, everybody, thank you for your time, and I'm very happy to take questions. I apologize if I rattled through it, but there was so much to try and present to you that I'm going at high speed. So yes, I see.
There's a number of questions that came in during.
Okay,
so if you don't mind, we'll go through those ones first.
Absolutely.
And then we'll take the people who have their hands up. So
yeah,
if that works.
Perfectly. So I have a quick sip of tea if it's all right, because I've been chatting.
Yeah. And I'll turn off the screen so people can see us. Not that's that much to look at on my part. But so let me just flip over to the Q&A. And thanks everyone for coming, and thanks James for being here. I know the time difference is significant for a lot of people here. So I just have to go to the first ones that came in.
Let's do that. Then I can.
Yeah.
Yeah, perfect.
So you said earlier that poaching has expanded in recent years to include dehorned animals. Do you think the method of radioisotopes will also protect these cases by extension?
Yes. If I can treat those animals which are, if you like, due to be dehorned again, so there has been some additional growth, because you have to leave a certain nub there, otherwise you damage the growth plate. So if I can come back, and if there's about 15 centimeters of horn there, then yes, we can probably treat those animals as well.
Okay, that's great. And then the next one, okay, if we're honest, the downfalls of being exposed to small amounts of radiation are much, much less than being poached. Is there any data that compares life expectancies of animals treated with radiation versus non-treated? Now, this is fairly recent, right? You
No,
probably
this
don't
is
have that
very
information.
recent, and we've done some theoretical calculations as what are the we've had to default in many times to sort of human data because the old-fashioned radiation protection principle was if it's good enough to protect humans, then it's probably good enough to protect biota. It's probably not strictly correct at the moment, but on that basis, the probability of an animal developing cancer is way, way less than the probability of the animal being poached. So on that basis, yes, we see a net benefit, obviously, to the animal. So we believe it's justified. There's one paper in the Health Physics Journal which has been published. We've got two other papers which are currently being reviewed for publication. So in the final paper, the second or the third paper, we talk about that probability of poaching and the probability of the development of cancer. And you could, so it's the probabilities of the animal developing the cancer, we believe, are significantly lower than that of animal being poached.
Yeah, and I'll get those links from you, or at least the one that's current, and I'll put that into the
That's in
documentation
the
that we're
October
sending out.
version. It's actually in this October's Health Physics Journal.
Okay.
Yeah.
Was the detector's minimum detectable activity taken into account when selecting the isotope and its activity concentration?
Yeah, we all of that was considered. We had to be quite careful working with someone like CBP not to say what is the minimum detectable activity of your systems, because no one will ever tell you that. What they were prepared to do with us, though, was say, yes, we can detect that level of activity, or no, we can't. Which in many cases was fine because we knew what to use to do, in terms of what activity concentrations we wanted to put into the animal. They could say yay or nay.
Okay. And, so the value itself is not shared.
No.
The minimum. Okay. Another one that came was, I assume you aren't allowed to tell us the radionuclide in use, unless I missed it.
I would rather not on a one-to-one basis. It's nothing against the members of the audience because, but we need to kind of keep it, under our hat. I mean, I've given you plenty of clues that those people who know will know, sort of thing, and they can probably go, yeah, well, that's what I think it is, and understand.
And there's a good chance they might be able to figure it out, but not necessarily.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Okay, so these are a couple of things. There was a bit of a conversation that was going on in the chat, and I put it in here so we didn't lose it. So this technique won't necessarily prevent poaching, but it will hopefully help catch the poachers. Is that correct? And then someone would respond, it is a great idea, but surely only detects after the home has been poached, which is a good thing as we catch the culprits, but the rhinos already suffered. So just...
No, this, if I might address that, this is the nuance of the whole project is because of events like this and because of the whole publicity that we've had, the primary thing is to try and reduce the number of animals poached by making members of the public, particularly in the Far East, understand that the rhino horn is potentially radioactive now. So they're going to throw their hands up. Well, hopefully they throw their hands up and say, I'm not interested in it. Because you have to understand the market for rhino horn nowadays, first and foremost, is displays of wealth. So wealthy people in the Far East want to be able to display a rhino horn in their house or the office to demonstrate their affluence. There is a smaller market for traditional medicine, which has always been there, but even that is changing. You'll see in the US and places like that where Chinese traditional herbalists and things are coming out against the use of rhino horn and suggesting that there are other plants, particularly in the pharmacopoeia, which can be used to treat the symptoms that rhino horn has been used. So first and foremost, it's to reduce the number of animals poached. Being able to detect it is part two of it, if you like, is the second bite of the cherry of the process, to be able to try and get, have that chance to intercept the horn and put the smuggling routes at risk.
Okay, great. Someone had asked, what is the protocol if there's a discovery of abnormal horn growth afterward?
We would probably then have to resort to dehorning. But my feeling thus far is, because there is enough horn growth, obviously those animals which we've treated already, we continue to monitor because they are at an orphanage, so they are checked every day. If there were then to be see some sort of abnormal growth, we would then first dart that animal and do some investigations to see why there was abnormal growth, because it can come around as a matter of damage to the horn when they're fighting and things like that. We will see breaks in horn because these horns are put under sort of significant mechanical stresses, if you like, when they're fighting and things like that. But if you're a materials scientist, you can learn an awful lot about how to make better composite materials by studying rhino. Well, it's fascinating how horn modifies its properties dependent on the water content, apart from anything else. You start talking about sulfur bonds and things like that. I'm kind of going off at a tangent, but you understand.
So this is someone said, if you're allowed to share, are these sealed sources, are they similar to the metal elongated seeds used in brachytherapy? Again, you may or may not be able to share that.
Technically, they're not considered sealed sources because for a couple of fairly practical reasons. If I buy sealed sources, they cost me a hell of a lot more money than unsealed sources. Because sealed sources then have to have calibration certificates and things like that, and all of that adds a very significant cost to the whole process of sorry, I was just hanging up a phone call.
That's fine. That's fine.
No, it's so by buying them by buying a quantity of radioactive material as unsealed sources, we know we work with the Nexa, who will tell me what the activity concentration is. Yeah, there are pins, but we modify them in a particular way that when we insert them, it becomes bloody difficult to try and remove them. And we
and that was the next question.
We hide them in plain sight in some ways, because there might be dummy sources and things in the horn as well. And to be able to try and isolate a radioactive source in an area that long, you've got a couple of sources in there. Yes, you can say it's radioactive, but can you then, unless you've got, you've spent a lot of money on instrumentation and shielding and that sort of thing, to be able to actually isolate in the horn where that sources are is quite difficult. Because I've been learning as I've been doing this whole project, I've been learning about, rhino facts and things like that. One of the interesting things, if you drill a hole in the horn, a couple of months' time, that hole will have closed up. So if I put something in the horn, you won't even know we've been there a couple of months after we've been put in there.
Okay. And that's what that was the next question. Is it easy to remove them? So obviously you say it's not.
No, that's been one of our kind of design philosophies, was how do we make it bloody awkward for, those people who have nefarious intention.
Yeah. Next one was, are you following the offspring and their offspring to see if there are any effects? And if so, what sort of biomedical testing are being done?
At this point, it's purely observational, because when you think about the inverse square law, the sex organs and the reproductive organs of a rhino are significantly far enough away from where the isotopes are that there is no dose. There's no additional dose to the reproductive organs of the animal.
The next question, I'm going to throw a slide up here because we were going to get to that. So thank you for the information, the work that you do. What can we do as an individual to help? So I'm just going to share this if you don't mind.
No, fine. And whilst you're doing that, someone was talking about the software program.
Yes.
Yeah, no, my colleagues at Texas A&M used MCNP to do the work. I used a program which we got from a French company called Ray Expert, which is based on Ghent 4. So we came at it. The whole idea of that was to create our own individual model using different softwares to look at the development of doses, to look at the dose and compare them. So our colleagues at Texas A&M did some of the work, and then another colleague at Colorado State did a sort of independent verification, and we came to very much the same, same ballpark figures of doses to the head. So that again is this whole belt and braces approach to the work that we did.
Okay. In terms of how to donate, and I'll give a little bit more after I've got a little blurb with this.
We would love you to go to our website, which is rhisotope.org. Don't need the www in front of it. And there is a donate button there. And if you press that button and put lots and lots of money in there, we'll be very happy.
Or even a little bit, right?
Even a little bit. Yeah,
a whole bunch of people giving a little bit helps.
Absolutely. We will. Every bit of it helps. It helps us pay for the diesel. It helps us pay for the isotopes, the transport, the accommodation, all of that sort of thing. Because we've got to get there to go and do the work. We've got to stay there. We've got to look after these animals. There's a heck of a lot of costs associated with it. So whatever people want to put into, donate, we're hugely grateful for. And I would just like to remind you that Monday is International Rhino Day. And if you want to give me a birthday present, because it always happens to be my birthday on that same day, which seems somewhat coincidental, stick $1 or $2 in there, it'd be much appreciated.
And I will, some people say they can't see what I am sharing, so sometimes Teams does that. Unfortunately, you have to hop out of the meeting and back in. That I will be putting up the PDFs for these slides, including the links to whatever papers that James has published on the topic, and links to, the links will be live there as well, so you can go and check it out. Now, James more than willing to stay here and answer questions. So if people can stay, that's fine. And Charmaine has agreed to start the Tai Chi after we're finished. So we're going to continue on. We said that we'd be going a little bit longer with this one. I hope people understand, but we understand if people have to go. I'm just going to take a look here. There were a couple of people that put their hands up, and then people started typing in the chat again. So hopefully people that have their hands up don't mind me mentioning their names. So we have Richard. I think you're able to unmute, and if not, type in the, let's see. So Richard, are you still here? Let me see if I can unmute.
I see some, as I'm squaring, someone's saying, could we apply this to elephant? We are actively working on that issue at the moment with colleagues in the Netherlands. We're looking to develop a process where we can treat elephant ivory. It will have to be slightly different from rhino horn because of the morphological and physiological differences. But yes, we are working on that. We're also looking at cycads, which are a sort of prehistoric plant, and possibly pangolin. I saw someone got their arm up there.
Yeah, I think Johnny, I made you presenter, so hopefully you can speak. If you're still here, you had your hand up.
Hello.
Hi. You had a question for James?
Hello, everyone. My respect from France. I'm a radiation protection officer, and I would like to know if there is any open PhD opportunity in this field. And thank you.
Thank you, Johnny, for your question. Not at the moment, but possibly next year. We've got to start looking at, like all of these things, it's funding dependent. I'm being encouraged by the Dean of the faculty to take on some more students, but yes, I would like to take on a PhD student or two. There might be some topics, but it's difficult to get the funding at the moment. Once we develop our funding for the additional research, then I think there'll be sort of calls for PhDs and students like that.
Okay. Thanks, James, for that. Someone else had asked about postdoc position radioactivity in Canada. I think that's a more general question. If it's a more general question, you can always email to info@radiationsafety.ca. And I send that to info@radiationsafety.ca, and I will give you a link. The CRPA has a list of places that have that type of university program. So you can send that one directly to me. And congratulations for the idea, and thanks. And it just says, I suppose one of the only sources of information would be animals treated for cancer with medical radiation, but the bulk of that is likely dogs and some zoo animals and much stronger radiations for use in this project. So I think that was more just of a comment.
Yeah.
People will give you congratulations. Oh, how's the public engagement going for the project in the surrounding communities and the Far East to disseminate information about radioactive contaminated horns?
We are ramping that up. The ongoing sort of international public engagement is something that goes on all of the time, but obviously has peaked just after we launched. We had something like, I don't know, $750,000 worth of publicity. This is from our media people at the university. The local engagement, which correctly recognized is very important, that will happen when we go to a particular game farm or something like that. Then we will have those much more focused conversations with the staff and things like that. And I suppose, if you like, there'll be almost a bit of kind of theatrical presentation to show and demonstrate to people that you've got to have the right equipment to handle this stuff, because it's necessary to not anyone can just handle the horn. It won't be treated.
Okay. Have you considered a form of the radioisotope that is inserted into the horn so that it's not easily removed? I think we've already
Yes,
talked about that.
we've there was a lot of that has been a significant development, is the whole process of how we put the isotopes into the horn and the techniques used. And that's something that's, I think we now have probably settled on a process which is safe for everybody concerned. The doses are managed quite carefully.
They were wondering whether a solution was ever considered to be absorbed throughout the horn.
No, the problem with horn is, yes, I talk about the water content of it, but there are two specific issues. One is contamination. How do you manage liquid radioisotopes? Can be quite problematic for basically the person handling. In this situation, it's me. I'm not keen to be handling liquid radioactivity, so we keep it as a solid. We've thought about it. We are starting to contemplate, because in those situations where Rhino have been dehorned for certain situations, there's obviously stockpiled. We are revisiting the concept of doing some neutron irradiation of stockpile rhino horn that will then have a different effect, in that the whole horn itself will become radioactive rather than having radioisotopes into the horn.
Yeah, for the audience members that may not be as familiar with the different types of radiation, that neutron radiation, when things are bombarded with neutrons, that they themselves can become radioactive. So that's what James is discussing there. And then someone had asked, is there any risk to the team during source implementation?
No, that was pretty much the first calculation that I needed to do for the regulator was, what are the potential doses to the people doing the insertion? So it's myself, the veterinary surgeon, the vet team, and things like that. And the doses are very well managed, and there's not a lot of threat to those people. I intend to live quite a bit longer than so I'm not going to deliberately overexpose myself.
That's a very good idea, and yeah, as you said, the regulator's not going to accept that.
No.
That you're going to irradiate your people based on this. So,
No.
James, that's I think the end of the questions that have come in, and the time's been we're getting to 1:15, and I know it's getting late there where you are.
Yeah.
So I do appreciate greatly that you came on. That we first met James at the CRPA conference this year, and then I reached out to him, and he more than willing agreed to come on today. So we really appreciate that. Just again, if you wish to donate, that you go to their website. This coming Monday is World Rhino Day, so September 22nd, and they're putting a drive on to raise funds, and the funds go directly into the work that they do. So like renting helicopters, getting the teams, getting people on the site, paying for the radioisotopes and things. So it's going directly for that work. Because not all owners, and if you get it looking into rhinos and how they're being protected, there are people that do own rhinos for the purposes of just protecting them. I'm not so sure how common that is in South Africa, but I remember seeing a show about that, and people saying it's like it gets quite expensive to try to save these animals for people. So not all owners might be able to afford being able to do this. So by doing this, you help people that are trying to help rhinos be able to get this treatment done. So thanks to everybody in advance who was able to do that.
If I might just say thank you very much for taking the time out of your days to join us. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for the important questions that you've asked. And lovely to see some of my nuclear security colleagues here from Africa, and it's great that other people have joined us too. So thank you very much for being so kind as to give your time and listen to what we've been saying. And if anyone in radiation protection, I can heartily recommend the Canadian Radiation Protection Conference as a good opportunity to network.
Oh, and there's your birthday cake, James. I didn't know how many candles to put on it since you said you stopped counting. So with that, we're going to just invite anyone that may be new, and this is your first one of our webinars, just know that you can find out more about us as an organization, radiationsafety.ca. We're a not-for-profit, and our whole purpose is to get out information, science-based information on radiation protection out to the public and workers. We have a 1-800 number and a free information service available. If it's over a 15-minute answer, then it's a consulting project. But if it's something we can answer right away, then that's free. And once the video is ready, it'll probably be next week. Then I'll send an email to people that were in attendance saying that you were here, what was covered in it. So if you do have a professional association, you can send that along. So with that, thanks, James. Have a good evening, and hopefully that this will help get the word out and spread the word to other people as well, those that were in attendance. So thank you. A very practical application of radiation protection principles.